Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to the Miami BK Meditation Center online. We're coming to you today from several different locations. And today is the third Sunday of July. And on every third Sunday, we conduct a world peace meditation. And we've been doing that in the USA for more than 40 years, and longer than that in our centers around the world. For the past almost 3 years now, we've also been conducting conversations that matter. Some might call them courageous conversations about things that are of personal and social interest to us in this very changing world. Just in this past couple of months, we've had 2 conversations on mental health. Last month was also the International Day of Yoga. And so we both practiced Hatha Yoga and practiced Raja Yoga meditation as we practice here in the BK Center. So tonight, our topic is freedom and recent events, and this being the month of independence. We celebrated independence in the USA, and recent events have really brought to the fore questions of equality and social justice. And so tonight we thought freedom would be a good topic. I was personally inspired, and the reason I suggested this was an article that I read in the New York Times entitled, I don't know if you can see this, but it's called, "What is Freedom?" And these articles, short articles by different ordinary and some not so ordinary people, they talked about what freedom was to them. So for example, freedom is self-care. Freedom was a seat at the table. Freedom was education. Freedom was in the naming. And freedom was overdue. So a very interesting quote that I'd like to share with you as well was by Saidiya Hartman. And Saidiya is an author, she's a professor, and interestingly, she was also a 2019 MacArthur Genius Award winner. And she said, "Freedom is an invitation to build the world you want to live in." So that's our topic tonight. And I'd like to introduce our panelists. We're going to explore these aspects of freedom from both the social and the spiritual point of view, because in fact, they are related. And I would say they're very closely related, and beneficially so from both a personal and a social point. So first, I'd like to introduce Craig, who was our featured speaker last month in June. Craig, can you turn your camera on and your mic? Great, there's Craig, and you might remember him. He is a Hatha and Raja Yoga practitioner. And also we have Tej. Tej, can you turn? There you are. So Tej, we're all coming from different locations, is both an engineer and a teacher and student of Raja Yoga meditation. So I know that Veronica McHugh, our director, is also going to be with us a little bit later. She's here, you want to wave hi? Yes. And she'll be weighing in as well. I know Veronica has a really interesting point of view on this. So Craig and Tej have had an opportunity to think about this topic a little bit. And let's start, let me turn it over to you, Craig, first. And do you want to tell us how you think of freedom?
Well, it's, you brought up an interesting point in something that you sent me. And strangely enough, I was thinking on that same point. Is freedom something that you gain, or is freedom something you let go of? Mm-hmm. How do you get to freedom?
How do you
and of course, I'm always for a minimalist viewpoint and freedom is about subtraction, removing the things that keep me from being independent is whatever I've collected, whether it's the past or the future. Both those things weigh very heavily upon one. As a matter of fact, we only have past, present, and future. So if you divide those three sets of time up, you get 33% roughly of each of them. If you stay in the present moment, you save yourself 66% of your mental energy and free space. See, freedom is free space, the free space that I have in my mind to accomplish and to do the things that I would like to do, or just to be. But it's very hard to be when I'm not free from my old opinions, my old nature, the entirety of all the consciousness that I have that I bring with me into the moment. So how could I possibly be free?
Yeah.
So, and then something I noticed earlier today about, I also put together socially in terms of freedom with, say, what's big now in our country is racism has become a big issue, and it's coming to the forefront, and we're forced as a society to examine our past and our tradition, our heritage, and just to say, not to make up beautiful stories about all these people in history, but there are human beings that made mistakes. So we have to re-examine this whole idea of race. And I saw earlier this morning in a coffee shop, an older man that was in a black body. And he came into the coffee shop and he said to the person at the front, "I'm going to go to the bathroom first, but then I'm going to come back and order something." And I realized that the reason he said that is to reassure them that he wasn't doing anything in any way that would be wrong, that he had to find space in his mind to become free enough to make others feel at ease for him being a normal human being. And I recognized at that time that we all need to have a little bit of brainwashing, just literally to wash our brains out so that we don't even see things the way that we're normally seeing them, which is just our tradition and our way of life that needs to be reevaluated. And so my freedom isn't just free from to do what I want to do, it's freedom to do what is right. So that's what freedom is not freedom to do what I want, but freedom to do what is right. And so then I have to discover what is right. And that's the whole process of a spiritual life, is discovering what's truly right. And that leads me to independence. And I was thinking of, anytime you want to chime in and ask a question, you go right ahead.
Well, hold on, because you raised a couple of topics like individual freedom that I want to get back to, but you also raised up spiritual freedom. So
yes.
let me go to Tej for just a moment.
Very good.
Tej, you want to weigh in on what is spiritual freedom? Craig talked about what is freedom, and he alluded to spiritual freedom. Why don't you tell us about spiritual freedom from your point of view?
Definitely. I loved what Craig said from the point of the present and the past and the future point, which makes complete sense to me from the spirituality perspective, because for me, even before I got any spiritual understanding or any spiritual exposure, for me, freedom was also, like you said, just independence to do what I want to do, But with the spiritual understanding, I've come to understand that freedom for me is freedom to observe my thoughts, on how I'm thinking. Basically, it's about that, what is going on in my thoughts, and basically the freedom from thoughts which restrict us, which stop us, which control us, or which don't let us do what we like to do, or let us bind us, like hold us, hold us back. And so for me, that is what I have come to understand over the years. That for me, freedom is that, that I want to observe that, I want to see what is holding me back, And most probably what I've come to understand, it's not others, it's not people or anybody else who's holding me back. It's always starts from it has always starts from me, because the first thing which is holding me back is my own thoughts, my own way of doing things and thinking, what I have been doing for years. And that is where we are able to change that or break that, then we are able to even achieve that freedom at a much higher or bigger level. So for me, spiritual freedom is about freedom from the way I think, or freedom from the thoughts which hold me or which stop me, or which don't let me explore my whole complete potential.
Yeah. I grew up Catholic, and always when we would study about the Christian prophets, the prophets were sort of the original disruptors. And they had one of the things that they had the role to do was to liberate us from old thinking. The old thinking may have been the predominant way of thinking, and people didn't necessarily want to let that go. But I think we're kind of in that space right now, where, as you were saying, Craig, we've been thrust into a space where we just have to look at our own beliefs, our own ways of being. So let's talk for a little bit about how we might incorporate freedom, spiritual freedom, new ways of looking at these everyday situations that we still encounter, of racism, of sexism, of injustice, of the need for reform at every level. How do we incorporate that spiritual perspective on a daily basis in our very practical lives?
Well, it's a matter of perspective, definitely for me. And so we're seeing right now, we're looking with our own eyes on ground level, and we all kind of have our own version of what that is. So I have two other perspectives, either one from a macro to pull away, or a more of a micro to go in. So if I do a macro version, I pull myself away, like I could pull myself away and even look at the planet. And it reminds me, Sister Veronica will be on soon, but we had a mutual friend in one of the astronauts, Edgar Mitchell, who was a friend of mine. And he was doing a program with us one time at another friend's house. And he said the moment of transformation for him was, he was one of the men that walked on the moon. I think there was 9 men that walked on the moon. He was one of them. And when he looked back and looked at the Earth, this beautiful blue and green and white planet, it shook him from his root of being a scientist, because he could not process all that information. And the first thing he noticed, that there were no borders. There was nothing there. There was no ethnicity. There was no anything. It was one big unit. And he brought up the idea that imagine if I had met someone, if there was someone from another planet, and you never saw people from Earth, if you met someone from Earth and they were your tribal enemy, you'd still be so glad to see them, because you're from the same planet, meaning the same tribe. The other version, another way to look at it, is go underneath the skin. As you go into a micro version on a cellular level, what is the difference between us? Scientifically or genetically, there's no such thing as race. This is simply an adaptation to climate. It has nothing to do with anything else. So we're judging by, it could be the color of the hair, the color of the eyes, like that one famous teacher did that class on the blue eyes and green eyes. I'm sure you've all heard of it. These are all things that we just pick, but they're all arbitrary in nature, and none of them have anything to do with what's real, what stays. So all I have to do is experiment by changing my perspective, either seeing it from a broader view or go very deeply into myself and examine how I'm thinking.
Craig, I'm so glad you said that. And if I may tell a couple of little stories, I personally have worked in civil rights and equity field for a long, long time. First in the realm of educational equity, and more recently doing research around health disparities. And this whole concept of race is a misnomer in a way. And race itself has, I think you put it this way, has no biological basis. But the idea of color as fading away, and that's a good thing, but it's more a product of like ancestry.com, you know, it's, how did you put it? That was a very nice way. It's your story, your history, you know. What was the term you used?
I don't remember.
I don't remember, but it was that your race is just a part of your story. You're basically your skin color, and nobody is only one of those anymore. And in the realm of health disparities, when we say, for example, that African Americans have a higher incidence of hypertension, it makes it sound like there's a genetic basis for that, but it may be questions of poverty and living, you know, living situation and inadequate diet, food deserts, and those sorts of things that contribute to it, not their race per se. So I'm very happy to see at least the beginnings of looking at the antecedents of race and how we got to this point. At the same time, I think it's a little bit dangerous to say, you know how people will say, and I'm speaking to, you know, I am the poster child for white privilege. So I'm speaking to my people in this.
I was just thinking that.
In the, will say, I don't see race, I don't see gender,
Yes,
I don't
right.
see ethnicity. But the danger in that, although it sounds kind of like a very elevated thing, is that it denies the experience of the other person. And unless and until we understand what the experience was or is of growing up as someone in a Black body, or someone who has a different sexual identity, or someone who is differently abled, unless we understand that experience, to simply say, I don't see race or any of those other things, can be very dismissive and would shut down the conversation.
I agree completely.
So,
well, so perhaps then compassion is a necessary vehicle to achieve freedom. That can't achieve freedom without empathy and compassion, that they're a necessary tool to get that way.
Tej, what do you think?
You know, I'm really liking the conversation, but one thing I would like to say is I've been very fortunate from that point that I've not experienced I've not experienced that kind of things or biases from the point of race or because coming from India, but I've experienced other kind of biases from the point of which region you are or from the culture point, you know. And I think again, I do feel that to some extent we all have those biases, you know. Some people have more, some people might have less, and we all have our biases based on our own experiences or what we have got from whom we have learned over the years. You know? And to say that I might not have that bias is of course not recognizing it. So I personally feel that I do have a lot of biases. Like for example, I for some time, you know, I had this bias that I'm a civil engineer and work on designing highways and bridges. And I for some time I had this bias that I mainly want to work with young people, you know, or young energy and people who are not really committed to the family or something, so they can put more time, they can do quick work and all that. And it was just my own bias that that specific category of people will be more productive, but that is not true. And it was just what I had created or what I had understood over the mind, coming from India, where you might have to work more at times. So but what I've understood is, first step is recognizing what I have. So I was able to recognize those things, and because I was proven wrong. And then other aspect is checking. For one thing I've learned over the years with spirituality is that I'm able to see what is going on within me, because I'm bringing the focus back to me and what's happening within me, rather than what others are telling. And see what's going on, the way I'm seeing things, or the way I'm judging people, or I'm concluding things about people, not even knowing, not even talking to them, just maybe looking at them. And I feel that somehow applies even from the race point, the color of the skin point, which you both were talking about. But I'm able to check back. Am I doing that? And try to do that, and what can I do about it? How can I change that perspective? And I love what Greg said about compassion could be a tool to that, to see everybody with that vision. And so that is what I feel, that we do have it. We all have it to some extent, but if we are able to observe it, then that's where the key is, and spirituality gives us that tool, I feel.
Yeah, I was remembering, Tej, when we were doing a program at FIU, you're talking about traffic, and how when we are driving and we get a little frustrated, frustration builds reactions. And we're in a time where there's just a lot of frustration, and everybody has it. This is not something that's just one group or another. The virus has been the great leveler. We're all frustrated, and particularly here in South Florida, being the epicenter of all of this. And there's a lot of pressure, and pressure breeds reactiveness. And, Craig mentioned compassion, and you were saying, check to stop. And I'm a real advocate of the power of the pause for myself. I have to do this for myself, to really stop and take a breath or 2 or 10, and get myself back, move my awareness away from the situation back into myself and my reactions. Before I can have some compassion.
Check and change.
Check and change. Check
Yes.
and change. So this is a tool. I want to bring this back a little bit to meditation. How Craig, you said individual freedom. It's not just doing whatever you want, but do we need spiritual freedom as much as we need individual freedom? And how can we incorporate these practices, like check and change, like detach, and so forth? Talk to us about that, how you do it.
Well, the key is, number one, what you said, you have to hit the pause button. And for many people, that's what meditation does, the first line of defense, that it clears. By hitting that pause button, I'm no longer accumulating. I'm stopping even like a lot of times when I give people in a hatha yoga class, like a short meditation, it's that even like your internal organs, just put them on pause for a minute. Just focus down. Like there's so much energy going out and out and out. And that's why we're full up, and why the pandemic has been the great equalizer. And that the idea of having to put on a mask when you go into Kentucky Fried Chicken has caused people to get so upset that they can't control their mouth, is because they have no space left. And so I recognize we're all part of the same organism, as is one, so am I. So let me say, well, I need to make some space in myself. And so what do I need to do to make some space in myself? Let me start taking away that which is unnecessary. So that's just hitting the pause button. Tej, I'd be happy to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah.
No, yeah, I do believe, yeah, that we all need that. We all need those moments where space and time for ourselves, where we can sit with ourselves and just focus inwards and connect and see what's going on. Just checking, what's going on with me. What are the thoughts which come, which pop up, and where they pop up from. Just observing them. And once we observe them, and just seeing if I really need it or not, and how can I change it. And one of the things I really like, what I've learned here at Brahma Kumaris, is how we see ourselves and how we see others. And that, where the more I practice this, one thing is about understanding it, but the other aspect is about practicing it, which gives such a feeling of liberation, and for me at least, it's such a feeling of liberation from anything and everything I do. Because from the perspective which you were saying, the sharing which you were doing about that astronaut, the astronaut friend, and when he saw no borders there, and I somehow like to practice that every day, just seeing myself as this beautiful point of light, maybe which is disassociated or not associated with all the things which are related to my physical aspect, my race, my gender, my culture, whatever it is, and just gives a big sense of liberation and freedom to me, at least. And one thing which again comes to my mind is, like, for example, I'm in this country, I'm on a work visa, and I'm sure all of you know a lot of the things which are changing and which keep changing. And then currently at this times, all the things which are going on, from the point of to whether to have it, not to have it, and the rules changing every day, even for the students who come from other countries.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I find myself very fortunate that I got this understanding and this spiritual knowledge and this practice of meditation, because I don't find myself getting affected by what all the things which are going on. I keep myself updated with what's happening, but because of this practice of disassociating myself with all this, my race, my gender, and whatever my work visa is here, I keep myself updated, but I'm at least able to come out of that thing which I could get stuck in. And I see some of my friends stuck in that, and I'm able to come out of it, and I'm able to just observe it, whatever it is and whatever I can do in that situation, rather than just reacting and panicking. So this has definitely given me a big sense of liberation. For me, that is freedom.
It's very practical.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's nice to see it works really in the practical, because your situation is a very timely one in our country right now. It's a political hot button.
Sure.
And I could easily understand where someone might have anxiety concerning that. So it's really about being in the present moment. And what allows me freedom, another thing, is trust. And it's related to that quote that you, from that MacArthur fellow that you quoted, is that in order for me to really have freedom, I have to have an idea that the ideal living condition that I dream about is a possible reality. And so trust is what allows me to have that vision. So then I'm not, when there's trust, there's no anxiety. Those two words can't exist in the same place.
True.
So thank you, Tej, for sharing a real life experience.
Yeah. And many people say, how can some of these things be going on in this country, in this year, in this time? How can this still be happening? And what I'm seeing, at least in the behavioral health field, everybody has anxiety. Everybody, and certainly healthcare workers who are being pretty much traumatized every single day that they have to take care of patients. But what's we all deal with anxiety and depression in different ways and to different degrees. And, most can deal with it in one way or another. But for some, it breeds a sense of hopelessness. And as we, as a society, begin to lose hope, or we lose trust in our leaders, or we stop believing that things can be better, or we live with constant frustration and change, to our way of life, then our whole world gets destabilized. And personally, I just honestly believe that the only way back to stability is to have the courage to look at ourselves and beyond the situations, and even more beyond our own weaknesses, to begin to get in touch with what we have to offer to the world and to those around us, because we're all very, very sure about our weaknesses.
Well, so now you're touching on the essence of spirituality.
Yes.
Which is, I cannot really look at myself if I don't realize that there's something more to me, or something that's able to do this. And so there comes that question of, who am I?
Who am I?
Who am I? I have to discover within myself this independence. So now we're into your other word. It's freedom and independence are, related so deeply. I can't have one without the other. I need to be independent in order to be free. And in order to be independent, I have to know myself and experience myself as an unconditional being. So who am I at my core that does not change? What are the qualities that I have that can always be there, that are not affected by things on the outside world? And this is what the process of meditation is trying to do, is crack that nut of all the layers of who I think I am on the outside. Yeah. And I'm here, who I present myself to the public, one thing. And then underneath that is my doubts, my fears, the things, my issues that I have. But that's not the depth. Underneath that is where I am. Who am I at my core? Mm-hmm. And once I start connecting to that, even if it's like a pinhole of light coming out, that really empowers, because a pinhole of light really can light up a room. Could have a completely dark room, but one match gives light to the whole place. So I only need the tiniest experience of lightness to become light. And then in my quest, because it tastes so good and it feels so good, I want to have more of it. And this is why I'm able to check. I don't check because I want to be good, or I just want to feel better. I want to have a better life experience. And so I have learned that by letting go and questioning these things, little by little, I can let them go. And I trust that I can, because I've connected to a part of myself that's deeper than these so-called existing problems. Yeah. So there's really no issue at all. I always have to go to something greater to remove something lesser. If the problem is greater than me, there's no way that I'm going to overcome it. I have to find that strength within myself that allows me to see it in a new perspective.
Mm-hmm.
That's wonderful, Craig.
Yes, I remembered something what Kathy and we were talking about earlier, that how this our own things which are going on within, and how these biases, or whatever we call it, how they become, when the policies, they affect people at a much bigger scale.
Yeah.
You said, Greg, like how if we are able to look within, if we are able to observe ourselves and be in present, and if think about if more and more people are able to do this, and how it would impact, eventually it would lead to an impact on those policies and the laws and everything too, right? Because the more we all are able to go within and check those things, we will be able to identify that. And the more people do it, it will have its implication at a bigger level.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Yeah, we were talking about discrimination, basically. And when we have these implicit biases, like Tej was talking about, for example, at work, if you're going to form a team, you'd rather have young men because you know they'll work hard, they'll do whatever it takes, they'll stay up all night, and as an implicit bias. And so when that bias becomes a policy or becomes a rule, only men get promoted into these teams for whatever reasons, then that becomes discrimination. So, and that's a societal thing. And we have lots of evidence about that. But this ability to imagine a better world, to see yourself in a better position is crucial, so that you can maintain your trust in yourself, number one. But that's very hard if you find yourself in a situation, if you lost your job, somebody's sick in your family, endless things. You've got little kids in school that you're worried about. So how can meditation, or how can we change our awareness if in a way that helps us rekindle that spirit of hope and trust and love and belief that will naturally calm myself and create, a more harmonious surroundings?
I think the answer is simpler than we think. Stop feeding what you don't want. Stop feeding what you don't want. And how that turns into real life is, if you see something, don't see what the problem is. I don't need to identify someone else's problems or what they're not doing right. I only need to see them in their purest light. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the people that have taught me, I was thinking of Daddy Janky in particular, almost refusing ever to see anything wrong in someone, because we're all so desperate. This world is so desperate at this time just to have a little validation. And that's why people are misbehaving. They're not giving enough validation, and what they're hanging on to is so tenuous that being told to wear a mask in public is all that it takes for the straw that broke the camel's back. And so I don't need to be a part of that process of identifying what is wrong. Let me identify what is right. Let me only see in someone what their power is. Let me see the peace in them. Let me see the goodness into them. Another teacher is saying, if a person has 100 qualities and 99 are bad, look at the one that is good. And then went on to say, like, you take a rose. It's the favorite flower of most of the world. It's fragrant, it's beautiful. But if you take one stem out, how many thorns are in each stem? And then how many blooms? And what is it that you notice? You notice the bloom. You don't notice the thorns. You're aware that the thorns are there, but that's not what you're focusing upon. You even have it in a vase in your room with the thorns and all. But what you're noticing is the bloom. So in the same way, let me continue. The way that we're working now about identifying problems and seeing problems and correcting problems and legislating problems, this it's going to go nowhere. It can't lead anywhere except dissolution of the state. So all that I need to do for myself in my own world, who I run into, is only see what is good.
Yeah. And I would add to that, see what is good and do what I can to bring that about. And I want to mention just briefly, if I may, that some of us have been participating in the YWCA's 21-day challenge. And in a way, it's a challenge to bring about a better world. And it's not too late. If you want to join the final week, you can check out the YWCA. And the reason the YWCA is taking the lead on this is that among social agencies, the Y has had from its inception, like almost 100 years ago, the elimination of racism as one of its goals. They've said it from the very beginning. And so it's right that they would take a leadership role in this. And they're encouraging everyone to educate ourselves, to, as you say, to be aware of what's going on, to, if you feel so inclined, there are things that we as community members can do to be engaged, because that helps that feeling of powerlessness. You know, we can write a letter, we can call our representative, we can encourage our neighbors, we can do positive things to bring this about that helps us as well as the community. So the piece that I think we bring to the challenge is this spiritual piece that amplifies the physical things that are being done. And as Greg said, if we're looking to the things that cause the problems to bring about the solution happen, we have to look at things in a different way. And you know, Taj, you're a good example of that. You're in the corporate world, and you're seeing, you yourself are experiencing some of the uncertainty in your immigration status, and you're seeing how some of these implicit biases play out, but many people don't even recognize that they have them.
Yeah.
So the first challenge is to become aware of ourselves, to really dig deep into that question of who am I?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So maybe, is this a good point to ask Veronica to come in and see what she might have to suggest on that fundamental question or any of these other points we talked about? Unmute yourself, Wadi, please. There you are.
Hello, everyone. That's been magnificent and real. And have I got? Yeah.
Oh, you're
okay.
You're good.
I'm there. It's such a big topic, and yet it is the foremost impetus of all living things. You know, whether you're an insect or a bud or a human being. And the impetus is to express that which is inherent in you. And the assumption that that which is inherent, although maybe of a long time ago, is that's natural, is actually divine. And when I was thinking about this, then so many quotes, so many people say it so much better than I can. And there's a song, again, Craig will remember it from the early days here. And the line is, separation has bonded me to gravity. Hesitation has robbed me of my throne. Liberation is my soul's sweetest destiny. My heart wants to fly away home. And so I think this is the thing that is true for all of us. And what's being suggested there is, or somewhere in that song, was that we had free will, but because we had free will, we messed with the plan. and now here we are.
Yeah.
And the image that came was that through these lifetimes or whatever, we're trucking along with all these weights and stones and heaviness associated with wherever in terms of matter and anything other than my real self that I identified with. And now through meditation, it's like we're beginning to drop those things again. And I think a big part of freedom is that what I once thought was real is changing, and that I should be ever open to that. And I think for real freedom, it does require courage, something that came up in our class today, that idea of the things that you think you own that are yours, be they your relationships, possessions, or whatever else, they will end up owning you. And so you're not free because you will compromise. And that's where I say some courage is needed, because we don't quite know what the prize is. And again, I quote something that Toni Morrison said, and that was, freeing yourself is one thing. Claiming ownership of that freed self was another.
Mm.
And that's a
Living
big
free.
one. Because you've identified with, say, for instance, being the victim for so long,
Yeah.
that you don't know really at some level how to be other than that, because it has become so imprinted on you. And another quote, I'm sure those of you who have read it may or may not remember it, but it was from The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky. And the question that came for me from that, can we, or are we capable of the freedom that God offers?
Yeah.
Are we capable? And the story there was that it was in the time of the Inquisition in Sevilla, and Christ had come back, right? And the chief, how would you say it? Inquisitor? However you say it, right. The chief one also happened to be the cardinal. And he's berating Christ for coming back. What are you doing here? You're messing with everything. You know, in other words, what he's saying, the idea that he was interfering with the work of the church, and that he's telling Christ, these people are not capable of the kind of freedom that you're offering.
Mm-hmm.
And that people prefer instead what the church at that time was offering them, which was miracles, rituals,
confession,
mystery, and
mystery.
authority.
Yeah.
You know, so God is offering something very profound. And you know, it's one thing to float along the surface and have nice meditations, but it comes back at some level to truth. You remember the line from the movie, what was it, not can you accept truth, or can you handle the truth? Can you handle the truth? The same thing, can you handle the freedom that is being offered by God? And I certainly don't say that I've fully claimed it. I have seen the changes. And you were referring to United Nations, and you may remember that the human rights, and there was a book that the BKs put together, again, juxtaposing all of the articles with the spiritual rights. And the one that was to do with freedom was that every soul must now reclaim its lost awareness and enjoy the highest aspirations to be completely peaceful, loving, and happy. And when all souls are endowed with these qualities, there will be freedom for each soul and for the family of souls that we know as the human race. But at the moment, there's a confusion between freedom and license. And again, the real freedom that is from that spiritual authority, and how we're being given the opportunity this time to essentially restore that which is paradoxically inherent in the soul itself. And yes, I agree with what Craig was saying, and I see this, you know, very, very much part of Daddy's thing, and I know it's an easy way to spiritual progress. And she would even have used the word that in order to be free of your own weaknesses, don't see the weaknesses in others. As simple as that. Yeah.
Well, that
So,
begs, this is a wonderful point you made, Wadi, about are we really prepared to handle our freedom? Because the extent to which we hang on to my form, my name, my reputation, my money, my possessions, my body, everything, is that's a process of letting some of that go. You know, we might also on our Facebook page put that meditation by Sister Jenna on letting go, which was very nice, and invites us into that process to use that in meditation, because it's, you know, that's a process in itself.
yeah, because we don't trust. It's, you know, on the one hand, we're yearning for it and craving it, but what if I let go of this? Who will I be without these? Who will I be? You know, that somehow I'll fall into, you know, I'm here and I'm striving for there, but I might just fall into that big hole that's between the two, you know. So I better hold on to this ID or material thing or relationship, whatever it is.
And I realized that just for myself, I may have even shared this, that I am really, I want to even use the word almost addicted to social justice. So I care about it very much. I've spent a lot of my professional life in that area. And so because that's my, I'm hanging on to that, then it's almost impossible for me to let that go when I see so much injustice around.
But I remember once a story where actually it was Gayatri, and she was on her way somewhere in Asia, and anyway, there was a situation where she came to know about this abuse of children and so on. And she got really indignant, you know. For those that may not know Gayatri, she's a little bit like Kathy in that sense. She's very much about social justice and all the rest of it. And it's not to say that those of us who are quiet are not for social justice, but she came to Daddy and she told Daddy that, you know, that she was now going to be passionate about this. And Daddy shook her head and said, you need to be compassionate and not passionate. And that's the thing, because sometimes it's like, and I don't remember to whom it's attributed, but something from my teenage years, that often the love of justice is more about the fear of injustice on one's own self.
Yes.
You know, that I'm afraid if this happened to me. And so it's that thing of how do you come from such a clean, clear space that is making a difference, but it's not, it's like sometimes even if you talk about young energy, it will go out and it will march and it will demonstrate and so on and so forth. And that's fine, that's okay. But there has to be, somebody mentioned that it's not just about having the thought, but then about doing something, but to do whatever it is, whether it's helping to get people to vote or however you see it in terms of the social setup, but to be able to do it peacefully and not where we get stuck, I think, is our overall tendency to think in terms of right or wrong, good or bad, villain or victim. And I think that's where we get trapped too. And it's like, you can't be forgiving if you're caught up in either one of those things. Is it possible to see everything just as this big drama in a sense, but where you're so clear about what it is that you have to do, and that the doing of all of you, if you're meditators, you're not caught up in the past, like I think we were mentioning today, that if you're in the present, there is no story, but it means that your present becomes that you're providing something, you're giving something, you're doing something, you know, without the whole big story. And yeah, and so anybody that's a meditator, that's into spiritual things, and it's not about being unaware of what's happening, but it's like, where are you going to go? Which fire are you going to go and put out? You know, that I used to think, well, if this situation got resolved, South Africa, Northern Ireland, if this got resolved, but you know, it's just going to pop up somewhere else again. But the more that there's an accumulation of the energy of truth. When I say truth, that which is true, that which is inherent, that which is divine, then that is going to have an impact and an effect, in that it will unburden others too, it will unblock things. Do you think all the things that are happening now is just coincidence? It was just because of one death? I don't think so. I think that we're also contributing to that. So now is the time for people to open up and see themselves in terms of their own goodness. And so how do we assist that process?
Well, that's what we're going to do right now.
Right.
That's a perfect segue to World Peace Meditation. And you mentioned Gayatri, who's in our UN office in New York. And so for tonight's World Peace Meditation, we're going to go to New York. We're going to have a virtual visit to the meditation room in the United Nations, where we'll have our meditation for world peace. And Craig had mentioned compassion. Veronica, you said, you reminded us about Daddy's turning passion into compassion. Well, that's part of the meditation tonight as well. So a lot of our talk has been about letting go of our story and our things that we're identified with. And I think people are probably ready to do that now. Anybody else want anything to say before we transition? No? I hope you'll all stay with us. We'll have meditation for about 30 minutes and then invite you to stay with us. And at the end, we're going to issue a very special invitation for you. Then we'll see a little promotion on that. So please stay with us for World Peace Meditation. And thank you very much, Wadi. You
Thank you,
topped
Kathy.
it off perfectly. And Craig and
Thank
Ted,
you. Thank you.
the brothers really stepped up today, I have to say. So it was a great conversation. Thank you very much. And now we'll turn off our cameras and turn it over to the UN office.
Welcome to the Room of Quiet, a virtual United Nations meditation room, an offering of the Brahma Kumaris to our UN family. As Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld wrote, we all have within us a center of stillness, surrounded by silence. This house, dedicated to work and debate in the service of peace, should have one room dedicated to silence in an outward sense and stillness in the inner sense. This is a room devoted to peace and those who are giving their lives for peace. It is a room of quiet where only thoughts should speak. During the next 15 minutes, we will be together in silence, focusing on the theme of a Karuna response to the coronavirus. Soft music will be played with a few phrases spoken in the 6 languages of the UN to guide us. Karuna comes from the Sanskrit kara, meaning to do or to make. Karuna is a compassionate state of being as part of a shared human experience. Karuna is the compassionate doing of something to alleviate suffering. Karuna is a key element of the yogic path, opening the eye of enlightened wisdom to see the harmony, connectedness, and interdependence of all living beings and their natural environments within the whole universe. Karuna is the highest level of compassion and is comprised of 6 basic spiritual virtues latent in the soul. These latent virtues are transmitted from the living beings' souls through the spiritual trajectory of awareness, attitude, vision, and action. These virtues live as vibrational frequencies in the soul, and their expression forms a living system of interrelationships that connects us in the experience of life. Karuna is like a satellite that emits the frequencies of love, kindness, mercy, forgiveness, non-violence, and generosity. The coronavirus is a global health and societal emergency that calls on the collective effort of human beings to take informed and effective action to protect the self and others. In order to cope with the suddenness of this outbreak and the drastic precautions people are being asked to take, there are a lot of emotional and psychological consequences, such as distress and anxiety, uncertainty and worry, confusion and fear and overreaction. Because there is no immediate treatment available to deal with the virus, people are moving into spiritual domains for strength, support, and signals. Karuna is offered as a collective spiritual experiment to help open our hearts and souls to a more elevated response, one requiring resilience and flexibility. Compassionate love. Compassionate love is care and consideration for someone. It is not selfish in its aims and upholds respect, reverence, and regard. Its intention is pure. People who love compassionately, whether for loved ones, their community, or all of humankind, do so continually and maintain a relationship with others through selfless service. In observing social distancing, the space of 6 feet apart invites us to practice the spiritual principle of being detached and loving. The foundation of human life is love. Love brings souls closer. Being detached gives us a chance to be fully present. Social distancing is the opportunity to share spiritual love. With your eyes, emit the vibrations of elevated thoughts and pure feelings. This is called drishti, the sharing of soul-conscious love. With your folded hands, honor the divinity in the other. This is called namaste. With your smile, acknowledge the other with the peaceful greeting of Om Shanti. From the heart, share spiritual love with your eyes. Emit the vibrations of elevated thoughts and pure feelings.
Par votre regard, partagez un amour spirituel qui vient du fond du cœur et propagez autour de vous la vibration des pensées élevées et des sentiments purs.
慈悲的爱，慈悲的爱，用你的眼睛去分享灵性的爱，放射出纯洁的情感。
Desde el corazón, comparte amor espiritual con tus ojos. Emite la vibración de pensamientos elevados y sentimientos puros.
الحب الحنون بحبك المليء بالحنان وببصرك. أنت تشارك حبك الروحي وتبعث ذبذبات الأفكار السامية والمشاعر الصافية.
Любить сердечно, делиться духовной любовью через свои глаза, излучать вибрации возвышенных мыслей и чистых чувств.
Much for joining us for World Peace Meditation, and know that you're part of something very big. We have centers on every continent, and at this very moment, there are thousands of people meditating with you. Also a reminder that the Miami BK Meditation Center is online weeknights at 6:30 for different programs and meditations. We're also on Instagram and YouTube, and I hope you will follow us on social media, and then you'll get reminded when we are live. So to close, I want to offer you a special invitation to a very big premiere. So please mark your calendars, check out the invitation, and we'll see you again online very soon. Thank you and good night. Let's watch the trailer now.
On Wednesday, July 29th, we want to tell you a story, but it's not an ordinary story. This is actually the greatest love story of all time between the soul and God. 8 postures of the heart, 8 stories, 8 artists. Intriguing? Be sure to join us on Wednesday, July 29th at 7 p.m. for a special screening, and it will be followed by an interactive panel discussion with some members of the cast.